Alright, I'm going to go over the homework for section 12.3, starting with number 14. And in number 14 we have a picture of a graph of a parabola opening up. They give us the vertex, that's what the V is, at 2, -12, and an additional point at 1, -9. So we have this axis of symmetry cutting right down the middle, or the line of symmetry. We have our vertex. I'm going to write that in here at 2, -12. And remember the x value of your vertex we use for the line of symmetry. So those we get right away. And notice down here we got some notes on how to find vertex form if you have the vertex and if you have an additional point. Vertex form is y equals a times x minus h squared plus k. We have h and k, that's our vertex. So I'll plug that in. I get y equals a x minus 2 squared minus 12. And then we take our additional point, which is -1, -9. So we know that this graph is going to go through, when x is -1, we know that y will be -9. I'm just taking that from this point here. So I'll plug in -9 for y. I want to find out what a is, so I leave that a. Plug in a -1 for x. And then I'm going to solve for a. To do that, I'll first add 12 to both sides. So -9 plus 12 is going to be 3. And when I add 12 to the right hand side, it gets rid of the -12. And I have a -1, -2, which is -3 squared. So I get 3 is equal to a times 9. Divide by 9, and I get a is 3 over 9, which is the same as 1/3. Alright, so we have our vertex form now. Let me squeeze it in here. It's going to be y equals 1/3 x minus 2 squared minus 12. And I'll box that in. That is what we were fighting for. Okay, so if you have a vertex form, you can get standard form by just multiplying everything out. I'm going to go ahead and do that. So I get y is 1/3 x minus 2 squared minus 12. And I'm going to continue to multiply through this. I'm going to have to figure out what x minus 2 times x minus 2 is first. I get x times x times -2, -2 times x, -2 times -2, keep all that in parentheses. I will simplify this a little bit further. Now I'm going to distribute the 1/3. So 1/3 x squared minus 4/3 x plus 4/3 minus 12. And then the last part here, I'm going to change that. It's 12 over 1. I'm going to multiply the 12 and the 1 by 3 to get a common denominator. And I end up with y is 1/3 x x squared minus 4/3 x minus, now I have 4 over 3 minus 12 times 3 is 36. So it's 4 minus 36. This is our 36, right? And 4 minus 36 is 32 over 3. And that is our standard form. Now if I set x equal to 0, if I plug 0 in for that, the 1/3 x squared will be gone, because anything times 0 is 0. The negative 4/3 times 0 will be gone, because anything times 0 is 0. And all that will be left is y equals negative 32 over 3. And so that's our y-intercept, 0, comma, negative 32 over 3. Okay, now I am going to try to factor this. So I'm going to take standard form, y equals 1/3 x squared minus 4/3 x minus 32 over 3, and I'm going to factor out a 1/3. And then I'm going to try to continue to factor. I'm looking for two terms that multiply to negative 32x squared. I get that from multiplying the x squared and the negative 32 together. And we want the sum to be negative 4x. So what two things multiply to negative 32, what two numbers multiply to negative 32 and add to negative 4? (32) is 8 times 4. So if I have a negative 8x and a positive 4x, if I multiply those together, I get negative 32x squared. If I add them together, I get negative 4x. So that is how we're going to solve that puzzle. We're going to rewrite the y equals 1/3. Rewrite the x squared. We're going to change the negative 4x to a negative 8x plus 4x. And keep the negative 32. Factor by grouping. So the first two terms here, I could factor out an x squared. Sorry, not an x squared, just an x. And I'm left with x minus 8. The last two terms I could factor out a positive 4, left with an x minus 8. And then if you look at these two terms, they both have a common factor of x minus 8. Factor that out and you get x plus 4. And that is our factored form. To find the zeros, you set y equal to 0. And we have three factors. We got 1/3, we got x minus 8, and x plus 4. But only two of those factors have a variable. So you just grab the factors that have the variable, the x minus 8 and the x plus 4, set those equal to 0, and you get your two zeros. So x equals 8 and x equals negative 4. And remember, zeros, roots really lead to your x-intercepts. So my x-intercept is going to be 8, 0, and negative 4, 0. Okay, so fill in some stuff here. Our domain of our graph is all real numbers. And in our function, it's just domains really saying, hey, what kind of x values are we allowed to plug into the function? Or if we were to graph this, how far left, how far right would it go? The range, well, it has a minimum value. That's my minimum right there. And the minimum value is really your y value, which is the lowest is -12. So all y values bigger than or equal to -12. This graph is opening up, so as you trace it from left to right, the first half of the graph you drop, or it's decreasing. And then when we get to the middle of the graph, we start to increase. The middle is your x value, which is at 2, the line of symmetry. So when x is less than the middle, 2, it's going to, when x is greater than the middle, it's going to increase. And when x is less than that middle, it will decrease. And then we want to put 5 points we go through. Well, they gave us, I'm not going to put these in order, but they gave us -1, 9. And they gave us the vertex at 2, -12. We found the y-intercept at 0, -32/3. We have an x-intercept at 8, 0, and another x-intercept at -4, 0. So there are 5 points that this graph goes through. Again, these are not in order, but there they are. Number 15. Number 15, we have 3 points that are given to us. Notice we do not have the vertex, but what we do have are these 2 points here, the -2, 0 and the 6, 0. That's what we call x-intercepts. X-intercepts are the x values when y is equal to 0. And so off the bat we get our roots at -2 and 6. We can get the line of symmetry by averaging our x-intercepts, or averaging our roots. So if we take -2, add it to 6, and divide by 2, we end up with 4/2, which is 2. So x equals 2 is the center of that thing. So if we were to draw our vertex there, our vertex is 2, something. We're not sure what the y value is, so we have half of the vertex. So just finding out what we have, we got a little puzzle here to figure out. There's some notes down here that I want to point your attention to. So if you know 2 distinct x-intercepts, which we do, distinct means different, and another point it passes through, we have that, then you can find the factored form of the equation. Substitute the x-intercepts, so part A, substitute the x-intercepts in for D and E in this equation. So here we have our 2 roots, x equals -2, x equals 6, so y equals, not sure what A is, but x plus 2, it's the opposite of what my x value is. I have a -2 here, I put a +2 there, and x minus 6, because my root is an x plus 6. Then I take my other point that I haven't used. Remember, in my graph I have 3 points. I got the -2, 0, I use that. I got the 6, 0, I use that. I have the 4, 9 that I did not use. So when x is 4, I know that y has got to be 9. So I'll plug in 9 for y equals a times, I'll plug in 4 for x, 4 plus 2 times 4 minus 6. And I get 9 is equal to a times 6 times -2. And so 9 is equal to -12a. Divide by -12, a is 9 over negative 12. Could reduce that to negative 3/4. So factored form is y equals negative 3/4 x plus 2 times x minus 6. I can get standard form by multiplying out factored form. So I'll take my factored form. Go ahead and multiply this out. So x times x, 2 times x, negative 6 times x, and 2 times negative 6. And then continue, now distribute the negative 3/4, so negative 3/4 x squared minus 6 over 4x plus 18 over 4x and plus 36 over 4. Keep simplifying this. I have a negative 6 over 4 and a positive 18 over 4. Negative 6 and positive 18 is positive 12 over 4. And then reduce the fractions. Negative 3 over 4x squared plus 3x plus 9. That's your standard form. And if you plug in 0 in for x, you're going to get 9 out for y. So my y-intercept is at 0, 9. Okay. Now for vertex form, we already have a. We know a is negative 3/4. We found that with factoring. We found that in standard form as well. We have h. We just don't have k. So let's list some of our points here. We know that when we plug in 0, we get 9. We know that we're given when we plug in 4, we get 9. When we plug in negative 2, we get 0. When we plug in 6, we get 0. And I just want to know about the vertex. What if I plug in a 2? So I'm going to grab one of the equations. I'll grab factored form. You pick, doesn't matter. Pick whichever one you want to do and plug in 2 for x and figure out what y is. So negative 3/4, plugging in 2 for x, so 2 plus 2 times 2 minus 6. And that's going to be y equals negative 3/4 times 4 times negative 4. Well, negative 3/4 times 4 is negative 3 times negative 4 is what's left. So y is 12. And that's the missing piece for our vertex. Put all that together in vertex form, you get y is a times x minus h squared plus k. And there's your vertex form. Domain of this thing, all real values. Range, it's got a maximum at that vertex. So the maximum height is 12. So all y values less than or equal to 12. This thing increases on its first half. So when x is less than the middle, less than 2, and it drops after it reaches its maximum height. So when x is greater than 2. last one, number 17. And we're starting with factored form. So from factored form, we can find our roots. Set y equal to 0. And then set each factor with a variable equal to 0. And so we end up with x equals -3. And then 5 over 7x is -5. Multiply both sides by 7. We get 5x -35. Divide by 5, x is -7. So our roots are -3 and -7, which means our x-intercepts are -3, 0 and -7, 0. So two x-intercepts. If you know your x-intercepts, you can find your line of symmetry by averaging those. So I'll take -3 plus -7, divide that by 2. It's -10 over 2, which is -5. So x equals -5 is my line of symmetry, which means my vertex is going to start at -5 comma something, right? And I'm going to plug in -5 into factored form. So if I do that, I get y is -5 plus 3 times 5 over 7 times -5 plus 5. And just start to work through that. I got -2 is -5 plus 3. Then we have a -25 over 7 plus 5 over 1. Need a common denominator to add that. And so when I multiply top and bottom by 7, so now I'm getting -2 times, well, 35 minus 25 is that's a -10, or +10 over 7. And that's going to, -2 times +10 over 7 is going to give me -20 over 7. For my vertex. So now we have our vertex here. For your vertex, you need h and k. You also need a. Sometimes a is hidden in factored form, and in this factored form it is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to multiply out factored form to find standard form, because you can't hide a in standard form. So just multiply this out. We have a x plus 3 times a 5 over 7 x plus 5, and distribute x times 5 over 7x is going to be 5 over 7x squared. X times 5, 3 times 5 over 7x, and then 3 times 5. And get a common denominator. And there's standard form. So A is 5 over 7, B is 50 over 7, and C is 15. And if you haven't noticed by now, C is always your y-intercept, because if I plug in 0 for x, I get C, which in this case is going to be 15. So y-intercept 0, 15. Vertex form, we know A is 5 over 7 now. So plug that into vertex form and get y is 5 over 7 x plus 5 squared minus 20 over 7. There is our vertex form. So we have a lot of pieces here. Let's get a graph of this thing. Actually, we got more negative x values, so I'm going to move the x-axis over here. So the center of our graph is at negative 5, right there. We have a x-intercept at negative 3 and one at negative 7. We have a vertex at negative 5, negative 20 over 7. Now, when you plot negative 20 over 7, negative 20 over 7, think about how many times does 7 go into 20. It's almost 3, but not quite, right? So it's going to be negative 2 point something. So about right there. And then for our y-intercept, we're way up at 15. I'm not going to I'll just put a point there and say that's at 0, 15. Label these points negative 5, negative 20 over 7. We got a negative 3, 0, and negative 7, 0. And let's get one more using symmetry at the height of 15. So that'd be negative 10, 15. I chose negative 10 because 0 is 5 to the right of negative 5. So I went 5 to the left of negative 5, which is your middle. And I got to negative 10, so just using symmetry. So I got all the points I want. So negative 10, 15, negative 7, 0, negative 3, 0, and 0, 15. Domains, all real numbers. Range is all y values bigger than or equal to negative 20 over 7. It's increasing when x is bigger than negative 5 and decreasing when x is less than negative 5. And there you have it. Hope things are going well. Talk to you later.